Today, I'm explaining my photo editing steps to turn this landscape photo into this one. The photo editing software I'm using for this is Adobe Lightroom followed by the Nik Collection. But even if you don't use these tools, you should still find something of value in the video. I'm starting with the raw file open in Lightroom Classic. I've photographed this waterfall many times before, but recently a tree has fallen across it. I don't mind the tree, but I don't like the branches that are jutting down and into the top part of the falls. To fix this, I'll use the Lightroom's Remove tool in the Erase mode. Both the Generative AI and Detect Object options are turned on to help make the repair. All I need to do is paint over the branch that I want to remove. When I release the mouse button, the tool detects the branch and we see it highlighted in red. I can then click the Remove button and we see a message that AI is removing the content. If I don't like the fix that's being applied, I can try one of the other fixes because the software generated 3 of them. When I'm satisfied, I'll select the next branch and try to remove that. I'll then remove all the other branches, which I like to do one at a time. After I've removed all the branches, I think the waterfall looks much better. I now want to produce a feeling of softness and mist above the falls. I'll do this using the radial gradient in the Lightroom masking tools. When my selection is in place, I'll move the black slider right, which reduces the contrast in the area, making the details feel less defined. I'll also use the other controls to enhance this feeling. A negative dehaze setting is usually very effective for this. When I have the area looking how I want it, I'll use the basic controls to apply global adjustments to the image. I adjusted the area above the falls first because I think it was too contrasty and distracting. I find that making global adjustments is easier once I've removed any localized distractions. My next step is to select the foreground area using a linear gradient. I can add this from the masking panel. Notice that I'm adding a large feather area because I want my foreground adjustment to fade gradually into the background. I'm then going to add contrast, clarity and texture to the foreground. This is to enhance the detail and contrast in the foreground, also adding to this feeling of depth in the image. When I'm happy with my settings, I want to improve the definition in the water. I'll do that using the brush tool on a new mask. This time I'll start by applying my settings, which reduce the highlights and make them darker. And I'll increase the dehaze and clarity to give the water some definition. With the settings applied, I'll then paint over the area of the water that I want to affect. When I've selected the area, I can use the amount slider to make them stronger or weaker. This is easier than adjusting the 3 sliders, and it helps me see if I need to make any other adjustments with other controls. I now want to enhance the detail in the leaves in the foreground. I'll do this by adding a new mask and selecting the brush tool. I'll again apply my adjustments before I begin to paint the selection. Now, while I've been painting, I've noticed part of a rock on the right of the frame. It feels out of place and it's interfering with the composition, so I'll delete it now using the Remove tool. I'm using the same settings as before. I can then paint around the edge of the rock with the brush. When I release my mouse button to stop painting, Lightroom selects the object. Don't worry that this isn't an exact selection of the rock. By selecting areas beyond the rock, it helps to blend the repair. After the fix has been generated, I can select the best one to use. I can also generate more fixes if none of the 3 are suitable. With the rock removed, the composition feels better. But I've also noticed there's a bit of clipping going on because the shadow marker on the top right of the histogram has turned white. If I hover my mouse over the marker, we can see the shadows that are being clipped highlighted with blue. This isn't a problem with this because it isn't extensive clipping, so I'll leave it. Next, I'm going to switch the camera profile to Adobe Landscape to produce stronger colours in the image. I'll then also check that it hasn't negatively affected the shadow clipping. Now I can tweak a few of the settings to get the image looking the way that I want. Something I do with a lot of my landscape photo editing is add a soft vignette effect. This is to darken the edges of the frame using the Effects panel, which draws the viewer's attention into the frame. I also like to use the Curves tool to lighten the highlights and shadows whilst darkening the midtones slightly. This seems to work well with a lot of my landscape photo editing. Another adjustment I also use with autumn scenes is to move the blue hue slider in the calibration panel to the left. This shifts the yellows in the leaves more towards magenta, making them slightly warmer. When I think the image looks right, I'll compare it to the starting image to check the improvements. If I'm satisfied with these, I'll export the image to Photoshop to continue my photo editing using the Nik Collection. The Nik Collection can be used as a standalone editing tool, but I like to use it as a plugin for host applications like Photoshop Elements and Affinity Photo. I'm using the plugin from Photoshop for this example, but it looks the same in all the other tools. I'll start by launching Nik Color Effects from the Nik Collection palette. This was installed in Photoshop when I installed the Nik Collection. When Color Effects launches, I'll add the Pro Contrast filter from the filter library on the left of the interface. I'm going to check the effect of the color correction slider, which is something that I always do. I can see that this cools the image slightly, so I'll apply the effect to the top part of the frame using a control line. This is a trick landscape painters have used for centuries. They use warm colours in the foreground and cooler ones in the background to enhance the feeling of depth in a scene. I'll also turn on the mask view of the control line to check what's being selected. White shows where the filter is being applied for the colour correction. I can then use the luminance and chrominance sliders to refine the selection. I'm now going to add a second Pro Contrast filter. This time I want to use it to enhance the detail and contrast in the foreground. After applying my adjustments, I'll add a control line to select the foreground. This limits the contrast adjustment to the foreground of the photo, which also helps to create this feeling of depth. Again, I can refine my selection using the mask view and the luminance and chrominance controls. Next, I want to use the brilliance and warmth filter to enhance the colours in the leaves. I'll add a control line to the filter and use this to select the foreground leaves. I can then refine the selection using the mask view and luminance and chrominance sliders. I also want to enhance the colours in the leaves above the waterfall. I'll do this by adding a control point to that area. I can then enhance the colours of the leaves still further using the HSL filter. I like to use this filter because it also allows me to shift the hue if I need to. I'll use the sample tool on the filter to sample the colour of one of the leaves. I can then use the colour strip to refine the selection. I'm now feeling that the foreground rock is turning too red, so I'll remove it from the filter. I can do this by adding a negative control point. All I need to do is hold down the Option key on my Mac keyboard. If you're using a Windows PC, that's the Alt key. A minus sign then appears next to the mouse pointer. This indicates a negative control point is being added. When I click, the software adds a control point to select the area, setting the filter opacity to 0 on the rock. Now the filter isn't affecting the rock at all. Next, I want to add a glamour glow effect to the image to soften and darken it slightly. Because I don't want the glamour glow filter to affect the shadows, I'll add a luminosity mask. After adding the luminosity mask to the filter, I'll change the selected luminance range. Now all the tones in the image are affected by the filter except for the very darkest. The image is now looking as I want it to, but the vignette around the edge isn't dark enough. I'll use the darken, lighten center filter to create a stronger vignette. As the filter is making the foreground a little bit too dark, I'll remove the effect there using a negative control point. As before, I'll hold down the Option key on my keyboard. Then, when I click, it adds a control line, removing the filter effect from the foreground. I'll also use the luminance and chrominance sliders to control the selection. As a final step, I'll use the preview options to just check the results of my adjustment. If I'm happy, I can apply the adjustments. Here's the starting image from the raw file compared to the edited image. If you check my Instagram, you'll see that I posted this along with a summary of my editing steps. I'll include a link to it in the YouTube video description. Now, I use the Nik Collection for a lot of my landscape photography editing, as I think it has some essential adjustments. To find out what those are, watch this video next. Thanks for watching today, and I hope you found this landscape photo editing example helpful. Don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already, and please visit my website for more tutorials. I'll see you soon for another video.